welcome to Mirage. This is Bryan Aiello. Today, Marcus Anderson is joining me, and we're going to be discussing,
books with social commentary, but definitely social justice figures into some of them.
I think that's how I started describing them myself. It's an interesting way to look at it, right? Because maybe even social justice, like warrior connotations, have negative impact on things, don't they? Or do they have an impact?
Well, that's very interesting because for me, I felt like there was a point where I had been seeing people using the word social justice warrior, with the kind of derisive, right? As a slur, and I didn't initially even get that, you know what I'm saying? Because to me, social justice obviously
it's not want that. Why wouldn't you want to defend it, right?
Right, it's not inherently a bad thing.
Exactly.
So I think that the kind of loaded nature of the term says more about the times that we're in than does about actual social justice.
Exactly. And I don't mean anything derogatory by it.
No,
I mean, totally. I like two of these books I've read, Mouse and Persepolis, I believe, are the two that I've looked at. I thought they're genius. I mean, we're not talking about the greatest art in the entire world here, are we? But we're talking about like a genius story that delves real deep into what it means to be human.
Right, definitely. And I think, I'm glad you brought up art. As we speak about these books, I think we're going to get that's one of the things I wanted to tackle in addition to the actual, text of the books, is just the different ways that the artists' varying approaches kind of, propelled the storytelling or the ways that they wanted to approach these stories.
Yeah, totally. You're on summer break right now, aren't you?
Yeah, well, kind of. Actually, in my job, I do teach, but it's basically year round because it's not in the school district.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool. I guess kids have a place to go every day of the year then.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Which one of these books do you want to start with in terms of art? I mean, I don't know. Which one is your favorite?
Oh, you mean just on a purely aesthetic, artistic level?
Yeah, I guess.
Man, that's a good question. I feel like I'm not trying to be diplomatic. I appreciate them all in different ways. I guess if you are talking about the visual side of things, like I really love Kyle Baker's work. And the two books on the list that he did were Why I Hate Saturn and Cowboy Wally.
I would say this is like a vintage type of art, right? Or maybe I'm just going by the cover.
No, I mean, you're right. You're right. Like he has a very he's definitely like what you would call a classic cartoonist, and you've probably seen his work and not even necessarily known it. Like I know he did work with Mad Magazine in the past, and
okay,
definitely a lot of big books in the 80s and since. Like he's obviously been doing things right up until today. But the two books that I chose were done respectively in Cowboy Wally, I believe, was 1988, and Why I Hate Saturn was 1990.
Kyle Baker is the writer and artist?
Yep, yeah, he does.
Wow, man. You do both too, don't you? Aren't you the writer and artist also on a lot of your work?
Yeah, and then one Snow Days I do with my friend Leo. He's the writer and I'm the artist. But yeah, everything else I do both. Some of the other series I work on.
So this guy's been active New York City. Okay, so he's down here still doing stuff. Kyle Baker.
Yeah,
DC Comics, Vertigo, Marvel. He's done the entire strip, right?
Yeah, he's done a lot of stuff. I'm pretty sure he's definitely from New York, but I'm pretty sure he might be in LA now.
Is he African American?
Yes, yeah, he is. Which is something that I think is interesting with his stories as well, because he certainly has told stories that are specifically from a Black character's point of view, but not exclusively. Like for instance, Cowboy Wally is not. He's kind of do we want to jump into Cowboy Wally first?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Cowboy Wally is one of the things I love about it, and I think the form, the way in which Cowboy Wally approaches social commentary is, it's very much like a satire of pop culture and just the idea of celebrity. Like Cowboy Wally is this kind of larger than life, both figuratively and literally, character where he's like this big cowboy guy, and he got his start as a celebrity doing like a children's show where he was like this character of Cowboy Wally, and he's basically just been chasing fame in different forms throughout, and the book kind of chronicles 4 different phases of his career. Like the first is the children's show, the second is the movie he did called Sands of Blood, and then the third is it's pretty hilarious. It basically chronicles like a time when he was in jail, and while he was in jail, he with his fellow inmates tried to put on a production of Hamlet, with very limited resources. And the third chapter is his stint as a late night host. So, but the book is just really good, and like Cowboy Wally basically is famous for being famous, and it's funny because even though this story is like over two decades old, actually 3 decades at this point, it's like
published in 2003. Oh no, I'm sorry, 1988. You're right.
right. It was originally published. Yeah, it might have been reprinted,
Republished. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
through Vertigo. I wonder who did it through in 1988 on his own, maybe possibly.
Yeah, I'd have to look. I think my copy is a reprint because it was actually very, very difficult to find for years. Like
It's
people were
interesting that he was like in 1988 he was 23 years old
yeah, and he's
in
still
like hardcore New York. That's like nasty New York, 1988.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And as we get into Why I Hate Saturn, like New York figures in to that story very much because it's like sort of like a time capsule of that time
Yeah.
period. You know what I mean?
What kind of work is this though? I mean, is it science fiction? Is it speculative? I mean, I guess if we're working in what's the time range?
So well, this story I would just consider satire. You mean
Satire only. Okay.
yeah, well, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as sci-fi. It doesn't necessarily have sci-fi elements. It's more just satirical. But the interesting thing is like even though it was done like 30 years ago, the whole idea of being famous for being famous is like very relevant now. You know what I mean? In these times that we're in. So it kind of there is a certain timelessness to it. And even though so I don't know, it's just very, very, very cool how he approaches it. And like one of my favorite things about Kyle Baker as a writer and an artist is that he's just got a very sharp wit. You know what I mean? So there's like a lot of really, really cool humor in the story as you read it. So it's really cool. And like I think like I said, the commentary in this story is very much some of the just the ways that like we are affected by and the way that we affect celebrity and pop culture.
It's very interesting. He came from cartoons too, didn't he? Looney Tunes worked in that animated feature back in action. He's done a lot of good, interesting things.
Yeah, he's done a lot.
I wonder where the humor comes from. In 1988, if you're 23 years old trying to break into comics, I mean, where are you getting your inspiration at?
That's a good question. I don't even know. I think, obviously I think there's some.
Oh man, this dude interned at Marvel right out of high school.
Yeah, like he's got a really rich history,
Yeah, he was like he was drawing on lined paper superheroes and then went right to the big boys.
Yeah.
There was like no cutting his teeth on anything. Cut his teeth on like real work. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, Marvel is like interesting too, isn't it? That was like kind of got a little bit more experimental.
It did, and experimental is I think it's a good word for him because obviously Marvel is very much mainstream comics, but like these books, Cowboy
Like
Wally,
the definition of it, right? The definition of mainstream.
Yeah, but yeah, these 2 stories that we picked, they're very much indie books.
Who's Vertigo today? Vertigo is what ended up publishing this in 2003. 1988, we don't know whether he did it independently or what.
He did do it independently. I could look it up.
Okay.
I don't remember, but it's you know what? I think it was originally published through a book publisher. I don't even think it was a comic publisher specifically. And
interesting.
And then Vertigo later on published it.
That was like that's unheard of too back then as well, publishing independent, or was that more mainstream in the 80s to do independent comic books in that way?
No, independent books have they've been around since like the 60s, but the thing is, I think today, the era that we're in, like there's a lot more avenues for independent comic creators to get their work out. And
I think we talked about it, right? It's more competitive. Everybody wants, there's just stacks and
yeah.
stacks, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the number of people in the competition, absolutely. Like it's very much more competitive. So that, it's kind of like a positive and a negative in the sense that there is a lot more opportunity and there are a lot more avenues for getting your work out there. But conversely, there's also a lot of competition.
So Kyle Baker is a contemporary. He's not a father
Yeah.
of your genre or whatever. He's now a contemporary of yours. Is he making it, or is he hobbled by something? And what would that be?
It's funny because it's like comics. I think sometimes comics is almost like it's a lot like music, like in the sense where you might look at somebody and you're like, wow, like that person's really celebrated. You've seen their work everywhere, and you assume that they're really successful. And then I've seen like a lot of documentaries about some of my favorite 80s and 90s musicians, and then they're like, no, I was riding a train and I was, you know what I mean, I was just like a regular person. So I couldn't say personally. I would say like when it comes to impact and influence, yeah, I would say he's very much successful. um you
Well, I
know
mean, if he was a contemporary of yours now, like he didn't have the back catalog and he was just starting out, do you think he would be as successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that his work has a certain like timelessness to it, and I think that it can translate to any era. Um, he has some newer work that I haven't gotten an opportunity to read. I think things he's published in the last couple of years, and I definitely am looking forward to reading it. But I have read more recent things by him, and I think that he's the type of creator that like translates to any era.
In 1988, though, they weren't really doing graphic novels,
Yeah,
really. So,
yeah, not in the way that I mean they were, because I remember being a kid back then, and I feel like late '80s, early '90s was when I really started, you know, get purchasing some graphic novels, and as opposed to just floppies. Like obviously when I was younger, it was all like floppy monthly comics. But yeah, I remember like late '80s, early '90s for myself personally. That was when I started getting some of the bigger books.
I mean, we're going to go into Mouse, and I know Mouse is older. I think what, 60s? No, like 80s, in 1980.
Yeah,
Wow,
Mouse
it was
was '80s. Yeah.
published as a serial. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, it
I
was
always looked at it
originally
as
in a magazine. I can't remember the exact magazine, but
um, that's not right in front of me. But let's not get away from Kyle Baker. I wanted to touch base on why you considered him a good placement for this subject, the social kind of subject matter at hand.
so all right, that's a very good question. So the reason why I picked him is because I mean, for myself personally, I feel like social commentary can take a lot of forms, and I think sometimes we think of very like overt examples, be it like a story that's an allegory on like race, important issues like race, war, like we're going to get into with Persepolis, and Mouse, and political conflict and a lot of these other situations. But Kyle Baker, I feel like there's a certain level of nuance, you know what I mean, to the way in which social issues and social commentary are woven into his stories. Like I said with Cowboy Wally, it's in there, but like if you can read Cowboy Wally on two levels. You can read it as just this really wacky comedic tale of this kind of ridiculous figure, or you can read it as that and a critique of like pop culture and celebrity.
Well, also, you can also potentially put onto it a sense of desperation, right? You've got
Yeah,
this character that has no real place in the world, so he's constantly trying to reinvent himself to find one.
yeah,
I mean, we're also talking about an African American author who probably felt that in his own family, right? I mean, watching his own uncles and grandfathers and fathers kind of struggle to find their own place, being bounced around from job to job or whatever you, prison, jail, whatever, the chaos of the moment, just trying to find that thing that's going to make you comfortable, give you the things that normal people have or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. As you read Kyle Baker's work, like a lot of it, I think that's definitely a question. It's kind of like, like, yeah, you feel like he's injecting some of himself into his stories, and you know, it's kind of up for debate, like where and how much of him it is, but like it feels like it's a presence. And as we get into Why I Hate Saturn, I think that's very relevant too.
Yeah, why? I mean, it's very interesting, right? Because you're talking about an African American artist in New York City, of all places, in the 1980s, the 1960s. I mean, his entire life. He saw the Bronx burn, right? I mean, he saw all the violence and the murders that happened up and down Hell's Kitchen along that little train area, and then development. I mean, what did they say about Times Square? How horrible that was. Where's Marvel at? It's on the east side, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think somewhere like the 50s, 60s, something like that. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, what an interesting character. I mean, talk about the second book and how it fits.
All right. So Why I Hate Saturn. It's basically the story. It's kind of, I would compare it maybe in some of its sensibilities to like Seinfeld. Not It's not at all derivative of that, and it's very much its own thing. But I would say just the way in which a lot of the narrative in Seinfeld is very much conversational, um, you know, and it's about like protagonists who aren't necessarily like glamorized, and the main character of this story is Annie. She's a writer, and first of all, I thought it was just interesting, as we've mentioned several times, like Kyle Baker is black, but like Annie is she's a Jewish woman. She's living in that particular New York of 1990s,
Hmm.
as in a very specific, artist, struggling creative person corner of New York in the 1990s. And a lot of the story the whole story is seen through Annie's eyes, but like the other four main characters are her friend Rick, who is um a young black man who I always saw as maybe like kind of an analog for Kyle Baker.
Hmm.
And then there's also Annie's sister Laura, and there's also Annie's ex-boyfriend, um, who figures a lot into the story later on. And one of the reasons I put this story on this list is that, number one, he does a really good job of centering the story from the perspective of this female character, and not in the way that like we oftentimes see in comics. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
she's not like an idealized, hourglass figure, glamorous character. She's real. She's a person with kind of real insecurities. The discussions that like she has with Rick are like conversations that probably most of us can remember having with friends in our 20s. You know what I'm saying? And like
Yeah.
there's a real relatability, the kind of doubts, the things that she deals with. um and Annie is like I said, she's not really idealized like visually. And it's really interesting, like initially she purposely wears like very baggy clothes, um and basically just kind of like it's almost like she's trying to visually disappear, like, you know what I mean, like she's trying to hide herself. She's got huge glasses and everything, and she's kind of not worried about attracting attention. And then at one point in the story, she kind of toys around for a second with maybe a more glammed up look, and then she kind of like gets herself made up and gets big hair. It was the 90s, and she notices instantly how like she's perceived differently, how she's treated differently by the same people. It's almost like it's like literally like they're dealing with a different person, you know. And one of the cool things that the story does with a level of nuance is, um as the events of the story kind of escalate, and the situations get a little crazier, um she basically like kind of loses that whole new Annie thing. Like it was literally just a phase, and it was a thing that she was trying on that I apparently just wasn't really her. And as she
Hmm.
finds herself throughout the story, it's kind of like all of that new Annie glamour kind of like slides away, and she basically ends up, dressing and acting like, like herself initially. So it's like, but the story doesn't make a big
Yeah.
or
Uh,
it's just kind of like,
Lost you for a few seconds there. Sorry, man. What were you saying?
oh no, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that like basically like the manner in which the story like does away with the new look of Annie is, it's not like a dramatic pronouncement, where she says like, new Annie's dead, I'm not putting on this lipstick anymore. It just kind of like happens. It's like as the panels go on and the story goes on, she just starts shifting back to herself in a lot of ways.
What I like about these books, both of them, is I'm looking at the art for the Saturn book. I love black and white work, where it just
Yeah.
it the colors don't matter because it's just so detailed. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's just so much movement in the lines and whatnot that I don't even think you can get if you colorize this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
there's a like a real incredible nuance. These stroke these what do just ink, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's ink,
Uh,
and he does very light, I would say, like sparing like ink wash, you know what I mean? But like even as far as like grays, like they're not like super rendered. It's just
yeah.
he's just got this mastery of line and like black shadow, and he's able to do it where it's like there's a lot there and then there's not a lot there in a lot of ways. You know what I
The
mean?
composition's amazing. Yeah, I love it. It's very balanced and it gives your eye something to play with all the way through. I'm just looking, obviously Google images, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm loving the art of the book because I mean, really, it's very compelling. It draws you through. I mean, there are words here I can't read them because I'm not really clicking on the images, but
Yeah,
the flow
if
is
you
really
get a
good.
chance, definitely if you get your hands on a copy of it, I definitely recommend it. Like I read this book pretty much at least once a year, just because it's, it definitely holds up to repeated readings.
Does it? It does help, right, in terms of your own creativity, making stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Like I definitely. I mean, I would say like I've been inspired by Kyle Baker. I think if you look at my work, it doesn't necessarily look just like his, but I think there's a lot of ways in which, sometimes people inspire you in the way where there's a direct correlation, and sometimes it's more just but like I just spent a lot of time as I've read this over the years, just studying what he's doing with form and line, you know what I mean, how he's able to use not that much in the way of lines to create a lot of volume and dimension.
I mean, I've not read this obviously, but it does make me think of Persepolis in terms of just that character navigating their world
Mhm.
and how you're able to you're given an intimate view of it, kind of unfiltered.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know and the other way that I think the social commentary figures into the story is, yeah, definitely gender wise. Like I
Yeah.
think that throughout seeing this story really from Annie's lens, she's able to give a lot of perspective on her particular experience, and then you see that contrasted against her sister, who's a totally different person. So it's not even like the idea of like a male writer coming and saying like, hey, I'm gonna write a woman, and he's got like one idea of how a woman is, like, you know what I mean, like you see multiple
Well, you
representations.
articulated this in a very good way. I think one of the first times we talked in terms of being a black dude. I mean, you have this perspective of who you are and then how society views you.
Right,
Isn't that
right.
what they're kind of doing here? They're removing the societal view of it completely and allowing you to
Absolutely. Yeah.
kind of see this person for who they are.
Yeah, you do. But then like in the example that I was mentioning with when she decided to switch up her appearance, that's where like I think Kyle Baker's able to sneak in some commentary about how society views her. So like, yeah, that kind of dichotomy that you were describing that I spoke about in terms of myself and race, like you see that through her too, as far as like the her that she really is, and that she's finding,
Interesting.
because she's also a character who's finding herself, because like these characters are in their, I want to say like their late 20s, maybe late
Mhm.
20s, maybe early 30s. And that's very, I know for myself that was very much stage of life where I was figuring a lot of things out, and a lot of people are, um, and so she's not like fully realized because she's a person in her late 20s, early 30s, but
Oh,
you
it's
know,
very interesting too, right? Because you don't have, typically, you don't have the ability to see exactly what society sees in you, but you can imagine what society sees in you. And I think that's what she's kind of doing. But again, did not read it, so I can only guess. But it sounds like she's trying to mimic what society sees in her with the new Annie character.
yeah, but yeah, I would say that, and it's almost like she approaches it like an experiment, though, like like um because as we enter the story, she's having like conversations with Rick about life and her place in life, their place
Mhm.
in life, and everything in perspective, and loneliness and a lot of things, and like you know the point in which it's like at the beginning of, I want to say, the second chapter maybe, where she shows up to work as the new Annie, and it's after like she's had a bunch of tense interactions at work. And I think she, if I'm not mistaken, it might even be when she was going to pick up her last paycheck or something like that. But it's just like it like flips the whole script as far, and it's kind of obvious, the whole idea of perception, because like you said, we can guess sometimes as far as how we're being perceived, but then there's certain times where it's just glaring. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
unfortunately.
like when I'm minding my own business and walking past somebody's car and they click the lock very obviously, like,
Yeah, it's not funny, but it's funny at the same time as a trope, right? I mean, it's horrible, racist, horrible trope, but it's a trope nonetheless.
yeah,
You
yeah.
see it in comedy movies, but this shit happens. I watched a video the other day, again, of a dude who's in a pharmacy, and they were telling farmer customer needs assistance all the way through the store.
Hmm.
That's never happened to me one time. It seems like it's fake. It seems like it can't be real. Somebody would treat another human being like that. It seems ridiculous, absolutely horrendous, but it happens, doesn't it? Like on a daily basis.
It does, and it's like, I'm very familiar with the black male version of that, and then there's, obviously there's a variety of, you know women experiences, and just like all types of groups of people in society that are kind of othered in various ways. And I think that that's one things that stories can do, because so like for instance with this particular story, because of the way that it is largely told through through conversation, and it's very very free flowing in the way that like conversation happens in life. It's
And
not
even that
heavy.
moves. There's an action to the conversation. I'm like looking at these panels.
Yeah,
It's not just two heads. It's like you're flowing, looking at things. They're gesturing. I mean, it's
exactly.
really subtle art. It's really cool.
Right. But because of that nature, the conversational nature, it draws you in a way where it's not heavy handed. So, when you ask me like why I chose these two books, it's because like I wanted to have a selection of books, that approach social commentary in like different ways. And for me, like, some of them, it's like I said, it's very overt. And these are ones where it's kind of subtle, and it's woven into the story. So like Rick, for example, he's the story isn't like, this is my black friend Rick and he's dealing with all this black stuff. But but he is a black man. It's
Yeah.
also not like they just made a random character and tried to make him have no race either. Like, you know what I mean? Like, his race is a part of the story. You know what I mean? But it's more nuanced. So like, like you said, like going back to that example I had given about my own experiences, that I'm, Marcus, who's a full human being who is black and likes being black, but I'm not just a black guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a full person, which is really the goal for
Yeah.
anybody, right? Like, we all want to be able to experience our full humanity. And so, you know what I'm saying? Like, so in this story, like Rick is he's a part of the story, and he's not only in the story to play a certain particular, role as his race. Like, that's one of the things that I hate about the movie Crash, is that it's not just the black characters, it's like everybody in Crash is kind of they're just there to present a side of a conflict, and they're not like people, really. You know what I mean? They're just kind of like all like a big messy caricature, simplified version of of an identity, and then they just all crash into each other, pun intended.
That's
You
interesting because when I see that movie, to me, it's a horror story about a freaking gun because guns just scare the shit out of me.
know? Mm,
I don't think about anything else other than there's a freaking horrible story about a gun and it freaks me the fuck out. I just hate that shit so much. Weapons like that and the fact that anybody could have one scares me, man. I hate it so much. But
yeah.
yeah, I can understand from your perspective, you see all these other stories happening, but me, I'm just concentrating on that gun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to even remember that part. Are you talking about like
Something about a gun and some fake bullets, and they were gonna pretend to. I can't remember what was gonna happen. It was horrible.
you're probably right. You know, it's funny because like I saw that movie exactly. Well, I think I saw it twice. I think I saw it twice, and I just kind of, I guess the thing that stuck to me was like they were trying to do something very ambitious, and I felt like they were failing miserably. But like, you know, anyway, we're not here to talk about Crash. I was using it though as a contrast to more nuanced storytelling.
Yeah, because they're
You know,
punching you in the face. They
yeah,
really are. Because I
yeah,
mean, when I was watching that, I was incredible. I found that they found the thing that was gonna tickle the most sensitive spot on me politically, and that was the gun. They found something on you too. I mean, they were all over the place in terms of their social commentary
yeah.
in that movie.
Yeah, but you know, it's I think comics and this is one point I wanted to talk about too is that like so storytelling you know, obviously there's tons of forms in which we could tell stories. There's, you know,
Hmm.
there's short stories, there's novels, there's comics, there's film, and I feel like some stories, you know, kind of transcend medium and can be told in multiple mediums, and I feel like there's some stories that really just work in the medium they're in. So there's some,
Well,
you
hopefully,
know,
right? I mean, in terms of an artist, in terms of being a graphic novelist yourself, I mean, when you do a story like this, you've got these boxes that you've got to fill, right? I mean, you can pick
right.
the size of the boxes, you can fix the scope of the story or whatever, but I mean, you're going to fill it in the most compelling manner possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully,
And
you're doing it for this and not to make a movie down the road. Or, when I'm writing a novel, I'm not thinking, oh, this would make a great TV series. That's not what's on my mind. You know what I mean? What's on my mind is the mechanics of the writing itself. Am I doing it right?
yeah,
Does this
absolutely. You know,
work? Is this compelling? Am I honoring my ancestors or whatever?
yeah, no, no, I hear you. And it's like, and you know, there's some people, more power to them, who are able to really, you know, have a sharp vision just as a business person, and they just know early on like, oh, okay, I'm going to tell this story this way initially, but I can envision down the line where it can grow into these other mediums, and they manage to do it seamlessly. And I think that's cool. I'm definitely not taking anything away from that. I just think that like there are certain comic stories that like really just work as a comic. Like for instance, I think maybe you could make a good Why I Hate Saturn movie, but like I wouldn't want them to. I just feel
No,
like it really works.
it
Like
might make a good that movie, but it's not going to replace the graphic novel, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. There's just something about it. And then all the other stories, like, you know, they make a movie and maybe it's better, but like there's some stories that are just such good examples of what you can achieve with this particular medium. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And I really think that like these Kyle Baker stories are the perfect example of that. And like with Cowboy Wally, one thing I was going to say is that um I think his art in that story really plays a large role too, because you know the story is kind of told in the form of a documentary, a retrospective documentary about his career as a famous person, you know, as a
Yeah.
celebrity, and like the look of the art has this it has this kind of like realistic, really representational look that, you know, can read as a documentary, but it also kind of has this like this certain level of levity and maybe kind of absurdity and expressiveness that's very much comic booky at the same time. You know what I mean? And he's able to
Yeah.
kind of like walk in those two worlds at the same time. So I think
Well,
it's
you
it's a
do
good
want
example of
that
the medium.
mask, don't you? You don't want what is it? Is it Uncanny Valley? I mean, is that something that you don't want in your comic books? You don't want the realism to be too real. You want the realism to be what?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, so yeah, that's a perfect example because, like, right, like today, there's obviously like all different types of artistic approach to comics. Some, there's some Marvel artists that are like super photorealistic, and some of them, it really works. and but sometimes like it's kind of distracting and it feels like almost like too posed, like you're
Yeah.
looking at somebody posing, and the technical ability that goes into it, you can really appreciate it. But sometimes you see something that's rendered um with more energy, and maybe something that's not as polished, but just really captures like
There
energy.
was this panel in a Calvin and Hobbes comic when I was a
Mhm.
kid that cracked me up. It was just Calvin standing over his father's shoulder. I mean,
Uh,
there was no words happening at all. The Calvin had a blank face, you know. I mean, the art is what Calvin and Hobbes is. They did nothing else. The
yeah,
thing cracks me up to this day when I think about it. I mean, that's how compelling it was.
yeah.
Just simple lines, black and white, nothing more than that. Not even a Sunday comic, just a normal during the week comic. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
Calvin
how.
Hobbes was amazing. Like he
Right.
he did a lot
He was
with
a
his.
genius.
Yeah, yeah,
I hate him though for taking himself away from us. Unfortunately,
yeah,
what a horrible industry. I mean, you're in the right mindset to be independent because I would never want to work for corporate America in any capacity whatsoever. It's just a nightmare. I mean, just hear horror
yeah,
stories, don't you?
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, in my in some of my like professional my day job career, I do deal with a lot of that. So it's almost like my creative work is definitely my respite from that. But so I've definitely seen it, but I try to keep that separate from the stuff that I create.
Even what is it? The DC comic Batman vs Superman. It wasn't called that though.
Oh, the movie or the
No, no,
are you
the
talking about the
the
Dark Knight
freaking
Returns?
fantastic graphic novel.
Dark Knight Returns, probably, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really good, right? But even the art in that was not great. I mean, it was like this kind of a way, in a way.
Yeah, that was Frank Miller. Frank Miller is really interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I think modern Frank Miller art is, I, we could have a whole episode about Frank Miller in
Let's do
itself,
it,
but
man.
like, I feel like I'll just say to be brief, I
Yeah,
do think that over the years, his I don't know, I feel like he's creatively become somewhat of a mess, and kind of a mess as an individual, but that's neither here nor there. But I think like his work, like on Dark Knight Returns and Sin City and stuff like that, like it's interesting because yeah, he's not necessarily somebody that's pumping out like super polished, immaculate,
it
panels.
works.
But at the same time, there is an incredible energy to some of that. Like Dark Knight
Yeah.
Returns, there's a lot there. Like, and
It's a beautiful book, right? I mean, it's really well. I mean, it's a story, and you
yeah,
can have lines, and like we can move right back into Persepolis, right? I mean, because
right.
I'm gonna read the books that you recommended to start off because they were
Yeah,
really good. But I mean, there's other ones that I want to talk about that you had on that list, and
yeah, yeah.
Persepolis is one of them, and that's a great example in terms of even the Frank Miller's um, Dark Knight Returns, which has interesting art. It's not really awesome art in my memory. I can remember it being kind of like this book where it's
Mhm.
like just the figures are there doing what they need to do in that particular panel and they're not
Right.
really detailed or whatever, but it's beautiful. It's still, it works. I love it. I mean, it's just really, if you do it well, it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. And this woman who wrote Persepolis, which is about a little girl escaping the 1979 Iranian uprising,
You're right. The
the
revolution. Yeah.
yeah, the revolution, right? They knocked out the Shah of Iran and they became a, what is it? What's the religious term for a
Um.
dictatorship? That's what
Uh.
they are, though.
Well, yeah, it was like an Islamic State sort of, or
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, and it's well, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful book. I loved it. I mean, it's like 500. It's so thick. It's a
Yeah.
gigantic book, but I mean, the thing, it just moves so fast. You could finish it in the afternoon,
Yeah.
and it's just really compelling. The story is about a girl who watches the struggle of females under Islam in Iran, and
Hmm.
the has the option to escape. So she sees the juxtaposition of them in France, which you have all the freedom in the world and the
Right.
restrictions of home. And still she's pulled home, I think,
Right.
at the end. I mean, we're talking like 11 years ago I read this. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
working on memories here, unfortunately. Am I pretty
Well,
accurate in terms of the plot?
yeah, I think you're pretty accurate. I think there's two volumes. Like the first volume is her childhood. I want to say like from age 6 to like maybe mid teenage years,
And then she
and
escapes.
Right.
Right.
And so
Okay.
one of the things that I really like about the first volume is like you're dealing with like really heavy subject matter because her like as you mentioned, like, her childhood is happening, with the backdrop of the Iranian, revolution, and then later on the war with Iraq, Iran's war with Iraq, and then
But you also got to see the freedom aspects too under the Shah. I remember
right,
party scenes. Her parents were drinking freely and having fun and
right.
no worries. And then there were other scenes where they were drinking secretly in that same
Absolutely,
part.
yeah,
I think,
and
yeah.
that stuff is like really chilling because it's
Right.
like her parents and her parents' friends were Marxists, and it was like very dangerous, to have that type of belief, and like several close friends of her or her parents die in the story, and recollects this, and this is Marjane Satrapi's like real life.
Yeah.
It's not like fictionalized, you know what I mean?
No,
These are
it's
like,
memoirish, isn't it? Isn't that what they called it? A
yeah,
memoir, graphic novel,
yeah,
or something like that. So
it is, and it's one of the really things that's interesting. Again, and I would attribute some of this to the medium is, you know, she's really able to convey all of this and like some really horrible stuff, but through the lens of childhood. And in some ways, it's like it doesn't make the experience of the kind of horrific events like insignificant to us as readers, but we're also kind of seeing it from her child perspective. But then at the same time, we're also getting like adult her, recollecting and kind of telling it to us, from the perspective that she's seen as a child. Um,
I mean, I'm looking at art right now for it, and I'm like, you shouldn't want to read this. You know what I mean? You shouldn't be sucked
yeah,
panel by panel through this 500 page, whatever it is. I mean, this doesn't look that compelling, but then you start reading it, and it absolutely is. You fall in love with this little girl and everything she does.
right.
You never leave her, right? I mean, she's constantly in the book. You're only
Yeah,
seeing events through her eyes, and
yeah, yeah.
people are reacting around her, right? She's kind of passive. No, I don't know, man. It's just really good storytelling.
Yeah, no, she's very active, and like, and I again, like you mentioned before, we see her grow up because like as we move into like book two or the later part, if you get the big volume, like you see her teenage years, and I think it's interesting, like the some of the stuff she deals with maybe acting out or drinking or other things are they're definitely like I think a result of just everything she's been through. You know what I mean? And like so I don't know. I think there's a lot because growing up in childhood and struggles with finding yourself are things that are very much universal. I think her life isn't necessarily universal as far as like living through these historic really heavy events, but at the same time there's a universality in her.
But you have to consider the audience, can't don't you? I don't think this book is being written for people in Persia
Right.
necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, this book is being written for the dude in Indianapolis. I don't know, whatever,
I mean,
middle America. You know what I'm saying?
I think she was telling. So I mean, I think she was in control of her narrative, and I think she was just really wanting to tell her story. I think you're right. Maybe marketing wise, and with this book gaining a large U.S. audience, absolutely. Like maybe um the larger share of her audience was
My point being though that she's writing this book to somebody who doesn't. I mean, obviously, growing
I
up
got you.
sucks for everybody. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It just sucks. Growing up is a horrible experience. Everybody has to go through.
Right.
And now you add on to that burden all this other shit that she had to go through that this dude in Indianapolis doesn't have to
Mhm.
witness. I mean, now hopefully he understands
Right.
that there are additional burdens that people are facing
Yeah.
that they're not bringing on themselves, that they're totally born into.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? And I think we're basically saying the same thing because it's
Probably.
like because that's I think that was kind of my point too is that there is like the universal aspect of growing up and like you said the stuff that really sucks about growing up
Yeah,
and
universality of it.
yeah, and even though she's in this very particular like think about it, even somebody growing up in Iran right now, this is still different for them. Like they would read this novel and it wouldn't directly, reflect their experiences. So, I think there's a certain benefit to being able to tell a story through the eyes of your childhood and have it be universal in that sense, but also be like, like, wow, like
That's very interesting.
she's a kid like me and dealing with some of the stuff I dealt with, but at the same time, like she was living through very specific historical events and tragedies.
You forgive a lot of the. I mean, she doesn't have to know everything either.
Yeah, yeah,
She can be a little bit ignorant and just kind of figure her way through it, which
yeah,
works because you don't know anything either.
right.
Especially at work like this, when you're bringing in somebody who doesn't know anything about that culture. I mean, it's a really interesting book. I mean, to think about, she grew up in France too, and then France really has a hard. I mean, the Muslim population in France isn't necessarily happy, right? I mean, they're
Yeah,
very
no, I
angry
mean, up
people.
until today, there's some, yeah, there's you hear about some really messed up, stuff where, people are rejected, and even like where like their way of dress is criminalized and at times. So yeah, no, there's definitely struggles in that.
And France is deadly in terms of religion too. I mean, I think I watched a video of a Hasidic Jewish man walking through a Muslim neighborhood, and he was spit on, and they were calling him names. I
Mm,
mean, I don't understand that perspective in terms of my life. I've never had to walk through a neighborhood anywhere. I mean, I've been in some pretty dodgy neighborhoods in New York City.
right.
I've never had any issues. Nobody's ever screamed out obscenities at me, spit at me, threw things at me, and that's never happened to me in my life in any place I've ever been.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Cross
and
my fingers, knock on wood, hope to God it never happens. But my God, this dude was just, you
right.
know, remember that video of that girl? She was walking through New York City, and all the dudes were
Oh yeah,
catcalling, and
yeah,
it was very reminiscent of that kind of thing, guerrilla style. They didn't know they were being recorded. He just looked like a normal dude
right.
walking by himself.
Yeah, and I think that that's why there need to be as many. I think storytelling is really powerful in that way. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
think it allows people to let down their guards. And like, so yeah, so you watching that video, it really lent a perspective that you wouldn't necessarily have had. And I can't remember if I gave this example on the show before, but like I had an experience. I'm gonna tell the story super quickly because in case I've already told it, I don't want to be repetitious. But like, basically, there was this. It was my senior year in college, and there was a class where it was an art history class, but it was kind of contemporary. So um, we discussed a lot of the social events and climate that was going on around the creation of some of this artwork, and it was very interesting because, like, there were a certain students in the class, a few in particular, who just you could tell had led very sheltered lives. They had a very kind of closed off idea about what other people's experiences were. And especially when it came to marginalized groups of people, they came from the school of thought that like everything bad that everyone else was experiencing was obviously their fault, and maybe they didn't work hard enough, et cetera, et cetera. And so we would kind of get into these debates in class, and these were just kind of like some people where they weren't willing to hear another person's perspective.
It's
And
unfortunate, right?
right. And then
Especially
so
that deep into their college education as well.
exactly, yeah.
Senior year, they're probably, you're probably not going to awaken them. You know what I mean?
Right,
At that point, they're pretty much already dead inside in terms of I'm this person forever.
right. Well, but there's somewhat of a positive in the story in that, like, so there would at my school every year they would have this scholarship competition, which was called the Rosa Parks scholarship, and like that year the idea was to create either something written or visual art that spoke to the idea of cultural plurality. So I wrote this poem and also a corresponding like piece of artwork, which was called Womb to the Tomb. And the concept behind it was pretty simple. It was just about the idea that like children are born without specific prejudices, like, you know what I mean, like you put some babies and some like little kids together and they're just going to see another person, and then like, but it's just the stuff that we're fed from older people who learned from other older people, you know what I mean, that like where we start having like a lot of these negative things come in, and this and just these structures, this institutionalized racism, sexism, all this stuff, like it comes later on. And I did this, and like I happened to be one of the scholarship winners that year, and so we had to do there was like award ceremony, and we presented the work. And so my professor for that particular class just happened to be there for that. And this took place like right before that class.
Hmm.
So after I read the poem, she was like, Marcus, you have to read that to the class. And I was just like, no, thank you. You know what I mean? Because I was, and I said specifically, I was like, look, you hear some of the things that they say in the class, that these kids, like, there's no speaking to them. They're not willing to hear things. And she said to me, like, those are exactly the people that need to hear this. And I said, okay, and I was willing to do it. Even as I said, okay, I was like, all right, I'll do it. But I didn't have very high hopes. And, it just so happened that, like, when I went in and I read it and, like, showed the artwork with it, like, the two biggest offenders in that class, like, I'm talking like real Bill O'Reilly type guys. Like, you know, they came up to me after the class and said, like, wow, that was really good. And they asked me for a copy of the poem, you know. Um, and what it showed to me was, like, look, I'm not saying, like, I'm sure it wasn't a Disney ending, I'm sure, like, these guys aren't, like, I don't know, whatever. But either way, like, there was something that was able to permeate that wasn't happening through our regular discourse. And I realized that, like, artwork has an ability to kind of, hit people's consciousness on a more unguarded level,
Yeah,
like,
totally.
and and
Look at like Black Panther, continue
Mhm.
to, beat the racial nail a little bit, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's a story with a bunch of African characters, right?
Mhm.
And it resonates so powerfully in terms of good art that people overlook every part of that and just enjoy it. You're not watching a black movie, you're watching a good movie. And that's basically what you're aiming for. You didn't just write a black poem, you wrote a good poem and people resonated with it. And not only did it have a message, but it had something more that people could get from it.
Right.
Right? And that's what people want. They don't want, like, I don't know, what do they want? They want
Well,
this, right? They want this book because this book is about a girl
right.
navigating a situation that's horrible.
Yeah.
And it's scented and accented and flavored with all these other things that get thrown into it, like the idea of living in France. What a great idea, right? But we know it's not really a great idea. As horrible as there too. I mean, she's a fish out of water no matter where she goes.
Right. But think about it, like, the Persepolis came out in, like, I want to say the early 2000s, like, and um you
Yeah, it was
know
perfect. 2007 is when I read it.
yeah, but I think it might have even been earlier. I think I want to say,
Possibly.
like
I
maybe,
read the
oh,
big one. I read the thick 2-volume version.
yeah, but it was definitely in the the raw
Right
post
there.
nine
Perfect time.
eleven era,
We're fighting Muslims. We're fighting those people who are the bad guys, basically, is how America was
absolutely.
looking at
Yeah,
them.
yes. And
Eating
so,
freedom fries and whatnot. I mean, basically, that whole book, that
right.
whole
No,
book was about enemies.
right, and that's the thing, is, like, she comes out with this very human, very relatable story,
Yeah.
and it challenges the narratives, and I think
It's not
that,
about that. It's about her, right? I mean, it's
right.
just about that little girl and about that character
Yep.
navigating her world, and that world is powerful. And I think going back to the first book that we're talking about, the cowboy book, it's his
Mm,
world, and he's a character, and he's a big character, and he lords over the entire thing, and he pulls you through. You could do
yeah,
anything you want, but you
yeah,
you navigate that character through a reality that has soaked with lots of nuances that you put meaning into. He's just a character living his life.
yeah, yeah,
Really neat.
absolutely. But yeah, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of humor there, and but
This book
yeah,
doesn't have any humor, though. Oh, it does. It has the
it
charming
actually
humor
does,
of
though.
growing
Yeah,
up, right? The ignorance of
yeah.
youth.
Yeah, she's able to, again, we kind of, like, talked about, like, creators, like, being able to walk the line, or balance, like, different dynamics, but
Yeah.
there is some humor in there. It's obviously not the same level of humor as maybe the Kyle Baker books, but it's definitely in there, and I think it's kind of and there's heartwarming stuff too, so
Her parents don't die, or is that a spoiler?
no, I don't believe they do. No, I don't. I think they
She
make
gets
it through.
reunited, I think, at one point. I think it's a happy ending. Can't
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, yeah.
Mouse, though,
Yeah,
is a
Mouse.
powerful book
It
that,
is.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, dude, you want to think a different way in the very beginning, and then the relationship he has with his father just really is raw. isn't it? I mean, it's
It
really
is.
painful.
It is, yeah, yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about Mouse is obviously, the first thing that people take away from it is that it's a story that's dealing with the subject matter of the Holocaust, and it kind of substitutes animal, analogs for the human counterparts.
Simple
So
art again. We're not talking about gigantically
right.
complex pieces here. We're talking about lines
Yeah.
rendered into vague images of what I mean. What is that called, man? As an art person,
I would say maybe kind of minimalist because as I was, I've read Mouse several times, but it had been a while. And like as I was kind of preparing for the show, like I was just kind of like reading up about it. And I read some interesting things where Art Spiegelman, the creator, had said that like a lot of those panels that we see, he actually had like he drew them and then he redrew them and he redrew them because what he was trying to do was to get down to kind of pare it down, you know what I mean, to
hmm
the simplest, clearest representation of what he was trying to evoke, so it was kind of purposeful, the simplicity that you might see in
it's
certain parts of
good stuff, though, man. It's scary, right? I mean, a
it.
lot of this stuff is really bleak. I mean, it's like it scratches.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like it's damaging. You don't know what's an injury. You don't know whether the guy's okay or the character's okay. Is he injured? I mean, you just don't know.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
bleak and just guns are being pointed in mouths and it's really horrible. There's a section of paneling where the one of the characters takes his face off,
mm, yeah,
right? I mean, he removes his face right there in the
yeah,
paneling.
yeah.
I did
And
not read this all the way through, unfortunately. I mean, it was very affecting, but it really got me too. I the relationship between the main character and the father, just there
yeah,
was something that happened, and maybe you can tell me what it was, but it affected me so much. I have no desire to pick this book up again, ever.
yeah, it's
Something.
been a while since I've read it all the way through. My memory, well, first of all, that's, I mean, it's good that you reference that because it's like, as much as this is obviously a story about the Holocaust, it's also an intergenerational story, and it's a story about
Oh, the
it's just as
mother.
much.
Yeah, the mother killed herself, right? In the
Oh
story.
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, 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 yeah,
It's just haunting, man. These
yeah.
characters, what they have to go through is so haunting.
Right. And
And
oh, go
but
ahead.
this guy, I mean, just like wait, I think you were going to go into the intergenerational, and what a great way to look at it. This intergenerational, this guy is trying to live his life in a world that's not this,
Yeah.
and these people haunt it every single day,
Right.
right? They haunt his world with their horrible nightmare of a past.
Absolutely, yeah, and one thing that's really unique about this story is that Art Spiegelman, the again like Persepolis, this is very much a firsthand like account of his family's experiences. So he actually like really lets you in and kind of pulls back the curtain on the process of making the book because he's kind of like while the stories are being told, he's also showing you the conversations he was having with his father, as
Oh
as,
yeah,
as his father was chronicling these painful memories, so through that lens of the story being just as much about their conversations and the dynamic between the two of them and where they loved each other and clashed, you know what I mean? You really see that kind of second generation struggle. Because if you think about like how horrible of a thing the Holocaust is, then you think about like what it's like for the generation afterwards, where they didn't experience it firsthand, but they were raised by people who survived the most horrible, you know what I mean, like
yeah,
circumstances and events, and like people who were scarred by this and carried that for the rest of their lives, and it can't help but to impact you. You know what I mean? So like that dynamic is fascinating too. It's like I really feel like this book um works on multiple levels. And then going back to our previous point about how some stories just really work best as a comic, I think this is also one of those, because just there's just something about it. There's something about seeing
yeah. You can't
him.
tell this story. Maybe you can do it if you have the exact same art style
Yeah. Or yeah, you're right.
somehow, right? I mean, you have to
Like
cinematize. I mean, you have to move it in a way that I don't know.
I think the Persepolis film did a good job of that because the film version of Persepolis really
Capture the
captured,
art.
yeah, the art and the way that the characters,
Would you be interested in seeing a Persepolis told with realistic rendering, like actors and actresses?
Oh, you mean what I would if they
Yeah, would you go
created
see
one?
it if it came out, or would you be mad?
I'd probably see it out of curiosity, but not, to tell you the truth, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like I really like the film. I did the animated film,
Mhm.
and the book. I feel like it's I kind of that's what I need. I feel like I got what I needed out of those versions. So I don't even know if I'd be mad. I just might not necessarily go to see it.
I want Wes Anderson to do Mouse. I think that would work out perfectly. In the
Hmm.
same stylings as he did Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I guess maybe live action. I couldn't see that, but
I
maybe
can't see live action, right? I mean,
yeah.
if, can you imagine the actors wearing mouse heads maybe
No, yeah,
and
that wouldn't
walking
work.
around? They're real people, but they're just wearing like paper mache mouse heads or something.
I feel like that would be really distracting though. Like,
It was, well, I mean, just mice in general would be a horrible distraction.
yeah.
Why mice? Ah, man, is it a comment on how the Jewish people reacted to the
No,
Nazis during
what?
World War II?
I wanna say, because it's been a while, but I feel like I read at some point that he said something to the effect of maybe don't read too much into what the specific animals are. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And it's more just that I
Well, the
think the
Nazis are
idea.
cats.
Right, yeah, and cats are predators, definitely. You know what I mean? And I think yeah, I think in that sense it's very representational. But I don't think that the specific, mouse. I definitely didn't read it as him being critical of his own people or their reactions to things. But there was definitely a prey and predator relationship when it came to the Germans and the Jewish people. So I mean, I guess in that sense, it's fitting.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the magic of how they told this story, how it kind of sticks with you. I mean, I guess all good stories do kind of in a way, but I mean, it really pulls you through. I mean, it really makes it a very impactful story. Does he go back into the Holocaust? I mean, like I
He
said, I was
does,
very
yeah.
affected by the mother's suicide. And I know you don't see the
Yeah,
mom die. I know the mom dies earlier on, but it was just horribly sad and bleak. I mean, it pulled you down. I was
yeah,
like in a graphic novel binge for a little while, and I think it like totally pulled me out of it. Like, I'm
yeah.
not reading any more of this stuff, man. It's too depressing. Before that, I'd read a story about lions who escaped the zoo in
Oh,
Iraq.
Pride of Baghdad, right?
It's so freaking good,
And
man. I was just like, it made me aware of how you could tell a story in this
yeah,
medium.
yeah.
It makes me hunger to try to tell a story in this medium, but I don't know, man.
You should do it, man. I mean, if you
Takes a lot
feel
of
it,
time.
like, it does take a lot of time, but I mean, I think it's I don't know. There's something very unique about the comics medium. Like, it does allow you to do things. I heard a very I want to attribute this to the right person. I can't remember exactly who said it, but there was a comic artist. For myself, like growing up, when you learn about comics and comic art, you learn that there's a very strong relationship between comic art and film.
Mhm.
Kind of the way that you frame things, maybe the angles you might use to capture certain feelings and things like that. Like, there's a very strong relationship, but there was a comic artist that raised a really good point that in some ways, even though there's that very strong relationship, comics can at times there's certain advantages that you have as a comic artist because if you're working in film, you have that very specific like 16:9 ratio of the screen, and you can do different things with that to maybe make a shot appear more vertical or diagonal, but for the most part, that's the framework you're working with is that 16:9 ratio. But with the comic, your panels, your camera can just take on like all different types of shapes, and you can use the space in ways that you can't necessarily with film. So like that just ties back to the thing about, I know I'm championing comics a lot. I love them, but I think that
Well,
there's
I don't see a reason why you shouldn't. I mean, I really do think it's a very powerful medium, and having it's new. I mean, it's less, what, 100 years old, a little older than that, maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you're at the advent of something. I mean, I read novels, and what they've been writing novels for 600 years. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah,
There's very
yeah,
little new you can do there. Movies are the same way. You're right, absolutely. But I think you can do whatever you want in comics, and
yeah.
you can capture those scenes if you know what you're doing. I have no clue. I mean, how do you do it with an art with the writer when you work with? You said his name is Leon
Leo, yep,
Leo.
yeah,
When you work with him, he's writing a script, right? He's writing a comic book script,
right.
and
He's
it's
writing a
detailed,
script.
right? I mean, it's really
Yeah.
hardcore detailed.
Yeah, yeah. He writes with a lot of detail. You know, both him and I mean, like we're friends too, so I think there's a lot of like conversation that happens before he even writes it. Like he had the idea, he had the outline for the story initially. But like we spoke a lot about like what it was gonna be. And but yeah, like when he like hands the script off to me, it's pretty detailed. And but at the same time it also allows me a certain amount of freedom, and it really just depends on the writer. Like different writers have different approaches. I have another story I'm working on, Cash and Carry, which that one I also did not write. You know, that was written by Julie Speziani and Sean Pryor, and with that one it's like a kids comic. So there's certain like comedic beats that are written into the story, but a lot of the thing I like working on that story is even some of those comedic beats are, they leave a lot up to me as far as to how I'm gonna like, you know, make some of that stuff funny. And I like that challenge, you know what I mean? So
And you can't linger either, right? I mean, that's the best part about it. You have
yeah.
to move on. You have to render the image. You have to move on to the next one, render that
Yep.
one, move on to the next one. So you have to be really kind of competent in
Yeah.
your storytelling in terms of the lines or whatever. But you have to make a lot of choices. I mean, it's limitless in terms of what you can do too. And I guess that's where you end up with mice, right? I mean, you just you just decide it works best for the story, and it's easier to draw. I don't know. Like, he's not the greatest artist either. I mean, what do you think about his art?
No, I think he is. You know, I mean, I'm very democratic when it comes to art. Don't get me wrong. There are some things I see and I'm like, I just don't like it, or it does, you know what I mean, or it doesn't necessarily move me. But at the same time, like, I just I'm fascinated with how many different types of good art there are. So, for example, like when I was a kid, I had very specific things. Like I loved, I really got into comics when I mean, I was already into him, but like when the whole Image Comics boom happened and Jim Lee came out,
Oh,
like, you
okay.
know, yeah, like that I was just like, whoa, okay, I want to do this. Like, you know, and so for that period of time, it was all about like Jim Lee or stuff that was like as cool as Jim Lee, you know. But since like, you know, so then I went away to college and it's like I really studied like studio art and you know, just saw art from a wide range of perspectives. And like after that, I was able to like really appreciate all the various different types of comic art. So like my range of what I was able to appreciate like really shifted. So like every one of the comics we're talking about today, whether it's, I mean, Kyle Baker is my favorite artistically out of these creators, but like I really do appreciate like all their styles. I think they're all like good artists. I just think that um they're good in different ways. Because like if you think about it, like comic book art and the skill level, it is about being able to create powerful, well rendered images, but at the same time, it's also like how much are they able to draw you in? How much are they able to um you know, like immerse you in that story. And like just from your reaction to all of these books we're talking about, like I can tell that you were drawn in. Even the stuff you didn't like when you said you had to put the book down, um I don't even know if you would have necessarily put it down if it wasn't so visceral and it wasn't something that you connected to, you know what I mean? So I think that yes, there might be something that seems a little more, I don't really want to say elementary, but like something that's a little simpler about like Mouse, the artwork in Mouse or Persepolis. But I think that there's a lot that went into it, and there is a lot there. And I think it's well done. It's just a different type of well done.
Yeah, I mean, also, I think my kids were born, or my wife was pregnant, or something along those lines, right around when I was reading it. So the
Oh
idea of a
yeah.
mother killing herself and leaving
Yeah.
her son alone in the world and to be raised by
Right.
a poor writer who doesn't who needs him. No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
No, it was really affecting, man. It was really horrible that
Yeah.
this people in our world now have to go through similar things. I mean,
Yeah.
people are being brutalized, have to live the next generation down from something that was horrible. I
Yeah.
mean, it's, I mean, you talk about in terms of our social commentary. I mean, you can definitely apply it here.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, excuse me if it's inappropriate, but I mean, you could speak of it in your community, right? Where fathers end up in prisons and sons have to be looking constantly for a father figure.
I mean, yeah, but you know, I mean, even that, like, we could talk about that too, because um there's so many different, like, the black experience isn't even one thing, and I'm not suggesting that you're saying that it is, but I think that a lot of the art that I like, specifically like stuff that deals with black people and in our experiences, like, really covers a wide range of things, like, even like as far as like films, like, I just so I don't know if you've heard of Sorry to Bother You. Like, I just saw it this past week, and it's a fascinating movie, and it's a movie where, you know, the protagonists are black, but it's not any of those. It's not about, like, you know, like these are people with families, and you know what I mean, and they're attached and everything, but their experience is very
Oh
much.
yeah, man, I have heard of this. I'm actually looking forward to seeing it. Is it good? Is it funny? It's
Oh
supposed to
yeah,
be a
yeah,
comedy.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, it's just, you know, I'm not even gonna describe it to you too much. I actually, you know what, I read really good things about it, and I
Me
purposely was
too,
like,
man.
yeah, I was
I
like,
heard really good things about it. Like it's crazy good, right?
yeah, and
Why
my
does it have a
approach was.
77? Oh, 94%. Okay.
Yeah, but my approach was like, you know what? I've read just enough. I'm not gonna read any more because I really want to go in fresh. And I
I'm
did, and
happy to have this conversation. It's out now, huh? That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. I would try to see it sooner than later, just because it's, you know, it's an indie film, so I don't know if it had a limited release. I mean, you're in New York, so it's gonna be
Yeah,
easier for
I
you
could
to
see
see it
it. I
than me.
just don't want to actually go through the effort to see it. I have to go to Lincoln Square or 34th Street. It's a pain in the ass. It's like,
Oh
why
yeah.
can't you be other places, man?
Yeah.
Just
Well,
get
whenever you can see, even if you see it when it comes out on video,
yeah.
just see it though. It's an experience. But my point was that, like, yeah, like, you know, because all right, this is what my point is. Like, being somebody who lived through the 90s and everything, it was almost like storytelling about black people was extra focused on fatherlessness
Uh-huh. That's
or
what I grew up, man.
prison.
That's all I
Yeah,
know. I
yeah,
know Boys in the Hood. That's my only reference. I go
right.
back to it immediately.
Right, and you know what? Like, I think that's, you know, if that's your reference, that's not necessarily your fault, because
That's
that's what the
all true.
industry was giving to you. I think the time we're in is really one of the good things about the times we're in. There's plenty of bad, but one of the good things about the times we're in
Yes, plenty of that.
is that, like, storytelling, like, specifically about black people, is it's bigger, it's more open, and it's not, so for instance, like,
Yeah,
some of
right.
those tales, like Boys in the Hood and things, sure, did I know people where that, like, reflected their story? It's like, yeah, but, like, you know, I mean, my story is, I'm an immigrant kid, you know, from Jamaica, and my parents were all about, like, look, you need to achieve, and you need to do this, that, and the third. So my experience isn't like parallel to Boys in the Hood. I mean,
Yeah.
there's overlap in the sense that, like, you know, I still dealt with, like, with racism. I still dealt with, like, all types of things, and, like, you know, when it comes to institutional racism and things, like, all they see is black. So it's not like they're like, oh, you're
Hmm.
a
You're
Jamaican
that
dude.
kind of black. You're just
Yeah,
black.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you know, I mean, there's my point is that I think that the more that people of all groups, but in this case black people, are able to, like, tell their own stories, the more, you know, the more variation you're going to see in what those stories are, because it's like there are so many stories to tell, you know. So that's a long tangent, but well, basically, you know, I think that you know, stories can deal with some of that stuff, that 90s stuff that people think about when they think about the black struggle, and there's much more nuanced elements of the struggle too.
Well, also back in the 90s, we're very segregated, weren't we? I mean, there were
Yeah.
communities, and I don't know, I can't speak for you, but in terms of my community, we weren't
Mhm.
going in that community. You know what I mean? So there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of sharing of information because you were scared shitless. You were told not to go there
Right.
or whatever the hell it was. But now it's kind of opening up a little bit because there's badass restaurants and blah blah blah. So you don't care anymore. So you're
Yeah.
now not. I mean, man, it was scary in Florida. I don't know if you've ever been. Those like places that you didn't know there were houses back there, but people lived there.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think you're right. I think that I do think even today America is very segregated in a lot of ways. That being said,
Yeah, that is
you know,
America. Because when I move up to New York, it's not like that up here. We
right.
bump shoulders. If we're talking about the second book, those characters work in a system where that dude's from X number of this neighborhood and what that
Mhm.
neighborhood has.
Right.
In terms of is it broken up into the Jamaican dudes and then you have the Haitian dudes over here, and then where he's coming from in terms of culture.
Right.
But in Florida, you don't know anything because they stay there because they're afraid to come out and you're afraid to go in, basically.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a good situation. Anywhere else in the country, go to Alabama. You know what I mean? There's a firm line dividing
Right.
this side from that side.
But that is why like representation is really huge in media, in stories and books and movies, because like just in our conversation we just kind of
Mhm.
spoke about how you know and I know in from just having spoken to you several times, like you're an open-minded dude, like but even for those of us who are open-minded and are coming from the right place, it's like our perceptions of the experiences of others are shaped by what we see, you know what I mean? And like so I think that you gave the example of Black Panther, being like a really good story, where pretty much everybody is black, and not just one type of black, right? There's like a wide variety of perspectives and characters, and that can't help but work towards expanding people's identity of who can be a hero, or you know what I mean, or like or just
Or what being a hero actually means, right?
absolutely, yeah, yeah. And if you think about like 100 or hundreds of years of American storytelling and cinema, where heroes are very monochromatic, and usually dudes too, even within that line of thinking, it really kind of, and then oftentimes villains or like people who are disposable or died were brown people. It really does feed into people's idea of who's who, because like um it's like there's the idea of like racism versus racist, and like like I don't Jay Smooth had a great video that a lot of people have seen about like it being more important to basically battle racism than racists, because you can't prove who's racist. It's kind of an empty.
Everybody's racist, aren't they? I mean, that's my philosophy. Everybody has a rate as racist, right? I
well,
mean, when
I,
you look in the mirror, you love what you look at, and you
well
want
let's
everybody else to kind of reflect that, right?
well, I mean, possibly, I would say everybody might have their prejudices, but I would challenge that by saying, like, what is it to be racist? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
well,
I
yeah, you
think,
can ask that. What does that mean? That
right,
means
because
I'm going to exclude you because you are something different than me, and that's the only reason.
right. So think about it like this. This is how I look at it. Like, um, there are absolutely people who operate that way and everything, but if you're going by that definition, I don't think everybody's racist. If you're going by the definition of, um, do people have prejudices,
Yeah.
or maybe, or things like that, then yeah, you could say maybe that might apply to everybody at some point or another. But the issue with
But the idea of what a race is so weird too, right? I mean,
oh
some
yeah,
people can just pass it
it's
off as you're a different color than me. You have more, melanin in your skin or whatever the hell the word is.
right. Well,
Or you
well,
could be you could be like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I mean, that was racism all the way based on a name. They looked exactly like each other, basically cousins, and they were murdering each other left and right because they had a different name.
exactly. And it's funny because it's like, race is a social construct. That's not to say like, oh, kumbaya, like, I can just walk out my door tomorrow carefree, because the world is operating off of that social construct. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm going to come up against certain challenges that are that stem from that construct. But like scientifically, you can have two people who are of two different racial groups, but on a DNA level, you know what I mean? Like they might be closer to somebody of a quote unquote different race. But that being said, like it kind of sucks because of centuries of
Exactly.
racial of just us like adhering to these racial constructs and institutional racism. It's like it is real. Like it's almost like saying like money's a social construct too, but I can't tell the bank I'm not going to pay my mortgage because I don't believe in social construct. You know what I mean? Or else I'll
Well, I mean, Wesley Snipes thought that, right? I mean, he definitely thought that taxes weren't necessarily needing to be paid, and he ended up in prison.
yeah, it
I
didn't
mean,
work out too well.
prison's not a social contract. That is a contrast. I mean, and that's a real thing that people go to and can't get
Right,
out of until their sentences are finished or completed.
right.
Um, I mean, yeah, that's a real thing. Walls are a real thing. The fact that in this book and the history of the author's life, his family went through this thing based on this ideology, right? I mean, that was all it was an ideology. It was nothing more than that. But a
Mhm.
lot of other people went through it too. I mean, if that happened today, would it be based on color of skin, right? I mean, that didn't really exist in Germany in 1935. The color of somebody's skin wasn't really an issue. Everybody was basically the same tone. Now, though, would it be the same or would it be based on color? Because it seems like everybody hates the different colors they hear: brown, black, whatever have you.
Yeah, you know what I say? I think it's really interesting. I think human beings will too often find a way to divide off
Hate,
and have
right?
the right. And I think you know what it is? I think that so for instance, and I've actually used this example a lot lately just with today's like post-Trump climate in America. But I see some of these people and they're so angry. Like I've never seen people. It's like you got some of these make America great again people who literally won an election. They got what they wanted. They got their guy.
Did they? And now
They
we're
got,
not even sure if they won that
but
election
that's my yeah,
or
absolutely,
if Russia
absolutely.
gave it to them. I don't
Yeah,
know.
right. And much like everything we were talking about, that could be a whole episode in and of itself. But
Right.
like just for the purpose of this conversation, like let's just say, like, okay,
They
on,
won legitimately. Gotcha.
right
I was
on an
quoting, right?
on an
They won.
electoral college level, the electoral votes came down
They won.
to yeah. So their guy won. Yet they're still so angry. They're angry at
They want to
people.
destroy everything. They want the Civil War. They really do. They want to
Right.
break it down and they want to kill everybody who thinks differently than them. And it's going to be a very lonely and dark and bleak world. You're just gonna be smelling smoldering bodies all over the
Right.
place as they
Well,
cremate the
well,
remains of
this
the
is and
dead.
this is the hope that I hold on to because I call it America's big stupid pendulum, and it's I call it that because it's kind of like America does this thing where we'll have some progress, not get over the mountaintop, but we'll have some progress, and it
Yeah.
swings back like
Slide right back
yeah,
down.
like you had
Oh,
the Bush administration and you had these never-ending wars that came out of it. You had, limits to the civil liberties of American citizens that came up out of that. And then that gave way to President Obama would not have been elected. We wouldn't have elected our first black president if not for the just everything that came out of the Bush administration, you know what I mean? And then that would do
Obama was such a genius man, though. I mean, the
right.
guy is going to be regarded in history as probably one of the best presidents we've ever had,
Yeah.
right? I mean, what did he do? He fought a disgusting, racist, intolerant, ignorant
Mhm.
right Republicans who basically thwarted him left and right.
Yep.
But what he left behind was a legacy of just the person himself.
Right.
He did nothing politically because he couldn't, but he still, man, what an image of an
Absolutely.
honorable dude. What an image
Absolutely.
of an honorable dude at the end of the
Yep.
day.
Yep. And then
Proud.
absolutely. And everything you just said, but then the big stupid pendulum says like, hey,
Now, yeah, we have on the
we've
other
got this
side
yeah, we've
the
got this
perfect politician.
well,
I'm
yeah,
watching him run 2016 going, my God, he's going to win.
well,
He's
yeah,
doing it
like
all right.
but this
Dude,
is
he's
what
stopped
happens,
by
right?
Ben
Like
Carson. He's stopped by Ben Carson in a debate. Ben Carson got confused, right? He's a genius neurologist.
right.
Got confused. He was supposed to walk out on stage because his name was called. and he was standing there like a big dummy. And Donald Trump came up to him and put his arm around him, and like, this guy's gonna win the fucking presidency. He's gonna win. He's
I
doing it perfectly.
yeah, I wish you were wrong, but
I'm
you're right.
not. That's the unfortunate thing. He's probably going to
Yeah.
win in 2020 too, because the dude is doing it right. I don't know what Russia did. They can't say they did one thing or another, but I know they didn't win Wyoming for him. You know what I
Look,
mean?
that's a whole other discussion. You're right, because like, like literally, I won't. If we really go down that rabbit hole, I'll talk for
It's a
4 hours
scary,
about
nasty
it. But
situation because you can manipulate America with a
yeah,
story, and that's exactly what we're talking about.
right.
You manipulate with character and a story, and you have this dude who is confident,
Hmm.
who doesn't mess up verbally, and bullies everybody else around him. You're like, that's a leader.
Well, look, you know what? He messes up verbally all the time, and
Yeah,
he
yeah.
it's I think one of the most
It's
fascinating things,
embarrassing.
and you're right. I mean, I guess to your point about him being the
But
perfect
if you
politician.
messed up, if we were standing in front of millions of people and
Right.
I had a verbal gaffe,
Hmm.
I would drop my jaw
Right.
and stare open-eyed into the camera as I shit myself, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Donald Trump does a verbal gaffe, and he's so whatever the blank is that he just moves on by it and doesn't seem to phase him at all.
Yeah.
He,
Well, he lies like
messes up on a
breathing. Yeah.
yeah, I know. It's scary, man. It just doesn't make any sense that a human being can be whatever, whatever the blank is he is being is scary.
Yeah. Yeah. But
He's
that's
either
what.
a genius or he's a freaking puppet.
Oh, he's not a genius, but what he is, he is savvy at branding, and he tapped
Yeah,
into,
savvy.
like I was reading that when he decided he was really going to go for it in 2016, that basically he had his then campaign manager go and just like watch like Fox News for like 2 months straight and just like boil down like
Are you
what
talking about
their.
Corey, whatever his name was? I
I'm
do
pretty
that
sure,
dude was like,
yeah, yeah,
I'm sure he was pushed directly into coaxial cable streaming Fox News when he was a
yep,
baby. I
yeah,
mean, they've been drinking this Kool-Aid for a long ass time.
right.
But Donald
Well,
Trump's not though. Donald Trump didn't drink this Kool-Aid this entire time. He was
you
drinking
know
different
what though? He's
Kool-Aid.
he's he's definitely been racist since for
Yeah, well,
decades.
he's
Like,
he's a New Yorker, right? He's a blue blood New Yorker. They're all racist on that level.
yeah, like yeah. I mean, like we could seriously go down a Trump rabbit hole, but like, I think the way we even got on this subject was,
We're
I was
talking
just
about
talking.
Nazis, right? I mean, we're talking
Right,
about
yeah, yeah,
fascists. So I mean,
yeah. You're right.
it's a natural like
It's a natural
navigation to it.
progression. Yes, yes. He's literally has equivocated for and propped up Nazi, and Nazis have also loved him. So yeah, I think it's actually apropos.
I mean, we were talking about why mice versus cats, because the cats are always
Right.
constantly
Right.
attacking, and
Yep.
the mice are constantly scurrying just so they can feed their families. They
Hmm.
don't care what the cats are necessarily unless it directly impacts them, because really, we're all about these really tiny social groups. I
Yeah.
care about my kids, I care about my wife, and
Yeah.
then outside of that, I care about my dog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then
Oh,
I care about your family.
right. That's how we got on the subject. Yeah, because we were talking. I know exactly, because you were talking about like the idea of if like what shape would the bigotry take, like whereas it was people who looked similar, but like today it might be color. And what my point was is that like I think when it comes to the nature of hate and discrimination and separation and all these things, that I think the hate hierarchy always like aims at like the most obviously different. So for instance, if you put somebody who's dark
Yeah.
skinned next to somebody light skinned, that's a more obvious difference. But then if you take away, all the darker skinned people, then like some of the lighter skinned people would be like, oh, you're, Irish, or you're, or you're Jewish, or you're this, that, and the third. So it's like, it definitely it happens, but at the end of the day, it's like human beings just have not learned from all of our just really effed up, you know, history of.
Oh man, we've just started to categorize our history, honestly, haven't we?
Yeah.
We've been lying to ourselves and each other for thousands of years. We had a book. I mean, I don't know your thinking on it, but we had a book that we called the Good Book forever.
Hmm.
You know what
Yep.
I mean?
Yep.
That was the only one that people knew how to read. They were
Yeah.
illiterate to everything else. I mean, Einstein and Copernicus and all these really good thinkers, there were Greek scholars that were putting
Right.
real data out into the world. Nobody knew shit about them. So there was no advancing anything until
Yeah.
people learned how to read something beyond those two books, you know, the New and the Old
Right.
Testament, or the Quran in some instances, or whatever the
Yep.
Buddhist
Well,
people read.
look what happened. Look what happens, though. You know, it's like you had the good book, and today you have people who swear they're more good book than everybody else, but what do? They judge their fellow man. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They when the Bible says like judge not, they you know they seek immense wealth when it says like it's easier for for an elephant or a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. So it's like they're living in direct contradiction to their own gospel, but at
Mm,
the same time they're also using it as justification to do really messed up stuff and just like um separate people. I mean, look, I mean the Bible, I think the Bible is a good thing, but it was also people interpreted it in a way where they were able to say like, oh, this passage justifies slavery, or this passage, or even up until today, this
yeah.
passage justifies separating Mexican children or South American children from their families. Like, so
It
it's
doesn't make a lot of sense.
no, it doesn't.
And
So
it's
yeah,
not a book that navigates laws very well. Even our Constitution fails, and that was written only 240 years ago. 200, not more than less than that. I
yeah,
mean, we're not talking about a document that has aged well. I
no,
listened to a podcast and they broke down the punctuation in
mm,
terms of what was meant and what was actually written. They were grammatically morons. You know what I mean? They weren't doing it
mm,
correctly and they messed up.
yeah,
I mean, there's a fallacy right there, and I can't tell you specifically what sentence they were talking about in the podcast,
yeah.
but there's a fallacy in the Second Amendment that just negates the whole freaking thing.
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly I know what you're talking about. I can't quote the exact words, but yes, I know what you're talking about. And then
And
if
there's
I
something
look
about a
at
semicolon, right? I mean,
right,
if it was a comma, it would mean something totally different because if there's a semicolon, the list follows. Nothing more than that can happen, and there's like
right.
you can form a state, but you can't do
Well,
something else.
even this our current interpretation of the um the Second Amendment as being about individual gun rights as opposed to militia, it's like that's like post 2000. Like, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't even like people's understanding of what that meant up until a point. It was literally the result of a Supreme Court decision. So
Yeah.
it's like like it is an imperfect document, and it does drive me crazy when you hear people go on about founding fathers, as though they were these infallible people when they were
Very
human
fallible.
beings. Yeah, they were human
They had
beings who were
they had a
operating.
crap education, right? They had
Right.
classics, but they
Yep.
didn't have really a lot of science. Science wasn't existing. And if they got sick, they got bled, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's not a good situation. Nobody was healthy. They weren't eating great. They weren't exercising to live. I mean, they were teeth. Have you ever had a toothache?
Mm-hmm.
You know what
Yeah.
that feels like. Their entire mouth was filled with toothaches all the time. I mean, they were
Yeah.
just constantly in agony from tooth pain. How could they possibly do anything good? And they hated each other. They had the Indians, they hated the
Yeah.
Native Americans, they hated the African Americans, they hated everybody who wasn't like Scotch Irish or something. That's like the
Yep.
only people that have managed to navigate their way through the hell of our history. I mean, yeah, man, that's what this book's about, right? This book's about racism. This book's about intolerance. And then how do you suffer through it when the generation that came before you had to really go through the worst evil
Yeah.
possibly imagined. I mean, that's what this book is about. There's like three other books that you put on this list, and we're at like an hour and a half into the
Yeah, I know.
podcast or something. I mean, I could muscle through it, but I mean, how do you feel, man? You want to do a part two on
Yeah,
the other
I
three?
definitely, I think we should do a part two so as not to shortchange the other books. Like,
Yeah, man, because I really want to get into them because these three are really good. Two of them I've read. Maybe I'll download the other ones and take a look. I do agree with you though. Um, the first two books have interesting art.
yeah, yeah.
There's a separation, right? I mean, in terms of age, I could tell he was younger when he wrote the first one and matured a
Um,
little bit between that.
in a Mouse and Mouse 2, you mean? Like the
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm not that's a good point. I'd have to look up how many years had passed, but
it says only
like
two, like
okay, 2 years
1988 to
into
1990, but it seems like the work had really marinated for a
okay.
long time. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, this has been a great discussion. I guess just if you want to find me or what I do, you can go to marcuskwame.com. That's MarcusKwame.com. And yeah, my artwork and comics and social media and everything is all there. But yeah, like this is, I don't know, this is good.